Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 76. And my guest in this episode is Ayelet Halamish. And Ayelet is an award-winning actor, writer, and podcast host with over 10 years of experience as a game producer. So in this conversation, we draw on those three standout aspects of Ayelet, and there's so much more to Ayelet, but you'll discover that in the conversation. I had a wonderful conversation with her. I very much enjoyed it. And so in her being a podcast host, she has a program called Middlescent, and that's the podcast series, and we'll call that Middlescence now and talk about what that period or chapter of life is about. So that's kind of the grounding nature of this conversation, but we talk about other things, again, her acting and also the game producer and how that all comes together to make her a very well-rounded individual and someone whom I believe will have a very bright future. So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and thank you as always for listening. And I'd like to welcome Ayelet Halamish to the IdeaCast interview series. I'm looking forward to having a interesting and flowing conversation with Ayelet. She and I have been talking before. We had a pre-meet, and then we just talked for a while before we hit record. We just naturally go into good flowing conversations together, and so you guys will be treated to that as we move forward. And so, Ayelet, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here as a guest.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
absolutely.
Justin.
Absolutely. So I think we'll be traditional here, and we'll start out, and I'm just going to ask you to share with us a little bit of your career background and any personal information you think might be relevant to this conversation. You're welcome to share, and then we'll go from there. We'll learn more about you as we unpack the things you were about to say. No pressure.
Not at all. Sounds good. Well, I'll start with the standard that I am an award-winning actor, writer, and podcast host. I'm launching my podcast, Middlescent, very soon. What else can I share about that? It is fairly new. Like, this whole writing and acting is something I took on in the last couple of years of my life, so it wasn't what I'd always been. But yeah, life surprises you. So I'm sure, as you said, we'll go through it and find so much more, because already I'm going to go off the rails. It's not even about me. There was an old time radio show with Red Skelton, and he had this character Junior. And I have it ingrained in my brain that there was, at the start of the episode, he introduced it by saying that when you ask someone if there's anything interesting or what's going on, and they say, oh, there's nothing interesting, nothing's going on in my life. He said, if you keep them talking long enough, you find out there's nothing that hasn't happened to them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So even though I can't think of anything now, I'm fairly certain as we get going, there's going to be like nothing that I can't cover or, haven't done in my life so far.
Yeah. And so in having researched you, I have to say, whenever I get a guest and they agree to come on the show with me, it's kind of weird in a way. It's almost like a nice stalking thing, like I just dig up what I can. There's that weird guy that he's got the little fisherman's cap, and he interviews celebrities, and he knows stuff about them that they're like, how did you know that? I'm not that good, but like I channel that spirit. It's like, I want to know what I can. And so researching you and your work was a pleasure, because I love the arts and entertainment. I love aesthetics. And so your work in film, in short film, I was checking out what you've got on your IMDb rap sheet and the production company that you've worked with, and there's humor there. There's just, it's cheeky. I just had a good time researching you, and so that's a testament to your work as an actor or actress, if you prefer. And so I wish to talk about that, but I also think that we will ground in Middlescent, and I think that will be of value to the YouTube audience. And by the way, YouTube, I'm so sorry I didn't say hello to you. I usually do that as part of the introduction. A belated welcome, because I value you guys so much as I value this conversation that we're having. So I guess what we can do in any good like back and forth dialogue, I would say, how did you find yourself moving into the field of acting and the arts and theater? And I know you were you worked with the gaming industry for a while, and then you pivoted over to film and to theater. So let's build that bridge between those two. What prompted you to want to get into, other than being a creative, expressive person, what prompted you to move into theater and into the arts?
So it's going to sound like I'm going around it, but I am answering the question. It's just when you bring that up, it made me think of when I was working as a game producer. Anytime I would say I'm a game producer, first you get the like, oh, wow, did you study that? Or how do you study that? I'm like, no, actually I studied electrical engineering, which has nothing to do with it. So how does that happen? And my answer was always, well, just life, because I started with very like technical and analytical system integration for building software for like cell phone companies. And somehow through that, with like working in a company that did gesture recognition software for 3D sensors, we had an in-house game studio so we could demonstrate what our programming can do. That led me down into games. And when I finally landed as a game producer, I was like, this is brilliant. It's perfect for me. It gives my creative side, because I've always had the creative, like as a dancer, and I play the violin and I haven't stopped since second grade, and love drawing and storytelling, and just addicted to TV and film, like in a bad addiction sort of way. So I got to have both. I got to be creative, and I got to do the math and the analysis and like creating and doing the engineering and problem solving, because I have to come up with the game mechanics and then talk to mathematicians to make sure it works and gives the experience that I wanted to create. And it seemed perfect until life happens and you start to contemplate, well, what's the next step? And we can go down all the conversations of, I do feel part of it is to the level that I've reached as a woman. I was starting to hit that like annoying having a foot in front of everywhere I try to turn. The other part, of course, is that pandemic caused everyone to kind of stop and reassess, because the company I was with had shut down. I actually managed during the pandemic to get investors and was going to set up my own game studio to save my art team's jobs. And we were going strong until their hotel business got hit, and then they couldn't continue that. So I managed to get everyone else work, and then I was stuck with myself. And the questions of, well, it's such a highly specialized and high level position that it's not like they're handing them out on the street going, hey, we need a senior level manager who's also very creative and artistic and also can do the math and people skills and all the rest. And while I was kind of doing that reflection for myself, I finally admitted to myself that acting was actually the thing I'd been wanting to do my entire life. But every time it showed up, I turned away from it. So I think the transition was just really admitting the entire time I was working on games, and I would work on branded content. So I would make games for like the Flintstones and Superman and the Matrix. And I was working with Lionsgate and Warner Brothers and Fox. And I kept lying to myself and justifying it and saying like, it's industry adjacent, it's good enough. Like I get to work with it, where deep down inside that little kid in me was like, no, but I want to be the one that we're creating the game about. Like I don't want to be creating it. I want to be in it. I want to be telling that story up front, not creating the games that support the story.
And that's a holistic approach to the greater picture, if you will, the greater scene that is, the entertainment industry or the gaming industry, and the enmeshed nature of those two. When films come out, obviously they want to brand themselves to all kinds of things, and so I don't blame you, because I think that's more of the spearhead of creativity rather than a sort of secondary line of creativity. In other words, you have the finished product. Now you got to make that finished product interesting and attractive, and people would want to use what you had created. And so I can appreciate that, because if you have that creative daimon in you and the force within you that's crying out to to express itself, that gaming's just not going to cut it. or what's your part in gaming, your part in the production process. I can see that, and I can empathize with that for sure. And you mentioned the violin. I think in one of the I didn't get to see the film because I don't think I guess maybe it's running around and you can correct me in film festivals perhaps, or it just hasn't been released in a format that I could access. And that was the oh shoot, I can't remember the title, but you were playing the violin. There was a way to,
Ambrosia,
yeah, thank you, Ambrosia.
I
Is that making
believe.
the rounds in film?
I think it's done with the film festival circuit, and I think it is on Amazon Prime, if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken.
okay, good. And for the audience, I'll have all the relevant links for Ayelish's work and means to access what we're talking about here. I'll put YouTube channels up and so forth that y'all can check it out and see. But yes, you were playing the violin there, and so that's been integrated. And do you have recorded violin pieces out there for people to discover, or is it
As far as anything recent, I think is the most recent work has just been jam sessions with other
oh,
musicians, and we haven't put anything out
okay.
out yet. I'm trying to think of what would be the last work that I did. I mean, for Ambrosia, I did improvise a piece that I played there, but I don't think it made it in the final cut because I was concerned that they would get in trouble with copyright since it was
Oh, okay.
me reinventing the Ashokan Farewell violin solo from the Ken Burns documentary.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
it was different enough, but I don't know. And I
You
mean,
never
I know
know.
because I had to dealt with the copyright laws when I was working in the gaming industry. So like just to protect you since it's going on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, you don't
So you
need
can
that
hear
surprise.
a little bit of my violin playing in that film.
Okay.
But as far as other recordings, nothing that comes to my mind. It's all been live, like
Okay.
orchestra performances.
Oh, okay. Um, Something down the pipeline, maybe you could
There
float around with that.
is a phenomenal, like a friend and artist, she that's also co-writing with me and also an actress. But she has a band and her solo act is Fortuna, and we were jamming around. So I don't know what's going to come from that. It's very, very early. It's like just the beginning of possible even a seed being
Okay.
planted.
Okay. Something to look forward to. Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you play classical. Is that what you were saying a moment ago?
I it's funny, like I always music is music. The same
Yeah.
when it comes to like the acting. I've been in horror, I've been in comedy, and I just look at it, I'm like, it's a good story. I don't
Yeah.
care what
Okay.
side, you're
Okay.
gonna have both. So I started studying when I was in second grade. So I don't know if hot cross buns falls under classical or modern, but
I
that
took
was
a
the very beginning.
I took a stab at that with the recorder when I was about the same age. Needless to say, I don't know where that recorder is.
And I just never stopped. So with every
Right.
orchestra or quartet, or I performed at some weddings, it's a mixture of classical pieces, and I love the Baroque and Romantic composers. But on the same hand, same side, I really do enjoy pop music, and so Vitamin String Quartet are an inspiration because they take songs that are popular now, but done in quartet
Uh-huh.
style. And I have
Uh-huh.
both an electric and classical violin. So
Okay. Okay. Did you ever play any Paganini? When you talk about violin, that comes to mind. So no pressure. I just want to know if you maybe.
I've attempted. I can't say that I've played
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I don't think it ever reached a point that I would share outside of like my little
Public
practice
performance of
corner.
Paganini.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. I understand. He's just one of my like triad of composers. I like Vivaldi, Haydn, and Paganini. Those are my go-to guys for, like you said, late Baroque into early Romantic. I like waltzes too, and I can get sort of like mid 19th century Austrian waltzes and things like that. But yeah, I love Vivaldi. Oh my God. That just sends me. Anyway, not to go on my own tangent about things, but okay, so you were a violinist and you had been involved in production with games. Is that still something you've got one foot there, or have you moved into theater exclusively now, or film and theater?
Um, so as far as priorities, I've definitely moved from my own personal priorities into the acting, and I'm also creating writing. So I'm writing scripts. So there's my storytelling part.
Mm-hmm.
Although I think anything that you have the ability or the skill to lend. So previous people who've worked with me have reached out and asked for advice or consulting on certain things.
Okay.
I'm always ready to help, and I'm always ready to offer. It's just not the thing that I'm actively going like, hey, come on, bring me in.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
have the knowledge, so why keep it to myself?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Now, what I love to ask people who are in acting and production and so forth, is what's your, if you're comfortable sharing this, what's your dreamy aspiration? Like, where do you want to see Ayelet in like 5 years, or what, what would be a I've arrived scenario? Like you're just like, holy shit, I can't believe I'm here. What would that look like? If you don't mind sharing. If you don't want to share it, we'll move on to something else.
I don't mind. I feel for my own like mental health and sanity in this industry and in this job, is to always look at like, I have arrived. The fact that I'm actually
Yeah.
doing it and I'm a working actor, because it's always looking back. Like if I look back at myself 2 years ago when I decided to even step into this and said, all right, if I'm going to do this, I should probably take an acting class. And those acting classes, my biggest aspiration was just to get paid for acting work. So like I've arrived to that level. And the bigger dreamy, I was trying to think of like if it's my voice gets lent to a character in Pixar, or I get to work with the Muppets and there's a figurine of a character that I voiced. I think that might be like I've
Wow.
made it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do have my sights set on like A-list acting, and I want the stories that I tell to be impactful. The ones that allow the audience to actually have a conversation afterwards. And ultimately I do it. So yeah, I brought up the Muppets because my whole life have been the one thing that I actually obsess over. I actually have my little Muppet Lego things for the YouTube people.
Oh, there you go. Oh, that's cute. Gonzo, right?
There's Gonzo.
Oh, yeah.
That Muppets is probably like what got me started. And Jim Henson, the fact that when he created Fraggle Rock, said, I'm going to bring peace and love through a kid's TV show. And he fully meant it. Like that was the intention. So I do see how important, like I don't take it for granted, the work that these stories and these movies are there for. And for me, it's always humor because it's just something that's within me. I don't know if it's a value, but I love to laugh, and I like to laugh at all parts of life. Good, bad, ugly. It can always kind of be easier to discuss or be taken in, and having those difficult conversations. One, it's easier when it's about a character that's external to whoever you're trying to have the conversation with. And when you can laugh about it, it kind of makes a common ground. So through, if it's on stage or on screen or anything else I do, or even the games I was creating, the experiences I was creating, if it allows people to feel human, even for just a moment, like fully feel whatever they need to feel, then I've done my job, and that's the best service I can offer.
So two things on what you just said. First, I was watching this thing the other day on YouTube. There's a guy, he just drives around with a camera and he makes videos of rural America. There's these little towns. And he was in Jim Henson's hometown in Mississippi. And apologies to Mississippians, I don't remember the name of the town, but you know where you are. And there was a little museum to not just the Muppets, but like Sesame Street, the whole family. And it was just a cute little, like, I don't know, maybe 1,200 square foot building. It wasn't huge. It wasn't ostentatious at all. And it's just very interesting array of different creatures, characters and things like that displayed in it. But I can even send you a link to it with a time set to start at that place. But yeah, it's Jim Henson's, and so I'm a child of the 70s, and I remember Sesame Street, of course, and then the Muppets came on board when I was like late 70s when I was a kid. And yeah, that was just Dreamtime stuff. I mean, that was just so amazing to see Linda Ronstadt singing with the Muppets, and all these other great, amazing people, chilling, like Elton John hanging with the Muppets. That's such a beautiful time to have those crazy characters. And then the movie, actually, my dad took me out to see that movie, and my parents were divorced, so he was like a Disneyland dad, so we would go and occasionally go see films together, and it was always magic because we both sit there like kids. So anyway, I'm on my tangent again, but yeah, the Muppets. Yeah,
I get it.
It's hard. Yeah, if you're from somewhere where you had access to the Muppets as a child, then yeah, that's a special part of childhood. And I've gone on this tangent enough to derail. Oh yeah, I know what I was going to ask you. So as an empowered woman, I could see you having stated that you were able to have the sort of left hemisphere capability of management, of analytics, and harder thinking, and then the creative aspect of yourself together. So it would seem to me it would be a natural fit if you were able to do production or direction and things like that. I mean, is that something you flirt with, or is that you? I know you want to be an actor and be an actress and do those things, but would you also entertain being multi-capacity in that sense?
Yes, and I am. And I think that's
Good.
why I'm in script, like that's what prompted the
Yeah, you
script
mentioned
writing.
scripts. Yeah.
Because we have to add the fact that I'm based in the Czech Republic. I'm in
Mhm.
Prague. So for pursuing acting and not being in New York or Hollywood, and even if I was in the US, it's just I think my natural thought process of I can't sit and twiddle my thumbs and just wait for the phone to ring. And so, yes, I'm still going out there and getting work. Like I'll send you the link for this too. There's a RedX article recently that came out about
Yeah.
the role I have in Murder on the Orient Express. So
Mhm.
there's those. And in the meantime, I'm creating stories
Mhm.
because that's creating work for me. And I don't know if necessarily every single story I write is one that I want to act in. But there is a feature script that I'm currently working on with the intention of directing and acting in it
Awesome.
to
Awesome.
showcase that and tell stories that are fun.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, here's to that. Here's to you just, no limits. Just go and just go, go, go. So when
It's
I
also the best way to kind of figure out if I like it or not. Like I think I've always kind of had this I will try anything once within
Mhm.
reason because I'm also a giant scaredy cat. So if you see me like rock climbing when I have to come back down, that's when I start crying like, no, why did I come up here?
Yeah, yeah.
But I had to go up there so I could
Oh
say
yeah.
I've tried it and I'm never ever doing it again. I have
Yeah.
rock climbed since then. But the point is,
Good.
within reason, I like to try things. And so if I try directing, I can either come out of it saying, oh my God, that's what I want and love to do, or I've tried it and now I know that's definitely not what I need to be doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what happened with I said, okay, I've always wanted to act. Let's try it. And not really knowing that as I keep going through it, I'm like, oh my God, there's more to learn. And I'm loving it more and more every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It could have easily gone I've tried it out and realized, okay, but at least now I know for sure that dream has to
Mm-hmm.
go to rest now.
Mm-hmm. You're in a good relationship with that now. Yeah, that makes sense. And that has to be there. It's not like a job. Yeah, I think there has to be a lot more commitment and passion and imagination and visioning and all these things that go along with that because it is I don't know anything about acting and I've never done it, but I just imagining myself what it would be like that's just it demands a lot of you, I guess, is maybe where I'm trying to head with this. And not in a negative way. It's just that you have to show up and you have to be that comprehensive person or whatever it is that you have to be to then become another person and do a really good job at that and then not overact and not do this or do that. So my hat's off to you because yeah, that whoever anybody that's ever walked out of a movie theater is like, oh, for a fleeting moment you're thinking, well, could I could I do that? Or, is that something I would think about? I don't know, maybe not everybody, but there's always, I think, that temptation to think, oh, what would that be like? What is that process like? And anyway, and you're doing it and that's good. And I'm going to
I
follow
think it's
your work. So
thank you.
watch you develop.
The fact that when people look at it, because with art, it's when it's done for anything, let's go with anything done right. Because even when I was working just as a manager or a team leader, it didn't matter what it was, all these like thousands of pre-calculated thoughts before I chose my action, which then I know mitigated like 80% of disaster.
Mm.
Nobody sees that. And it was a Futurama quote that really sunk in when I saw the episode of Bender floating through the binary cloud and he was playing God. And he said, they asked for water. I gave them water. Then they drowned. They asked for heat. I gave them heat and then I burnt them. It's like, no matter what I do, it goes wrong. And the binary cloud said, when you do things right, no one knows you've done anything at all.
Mm.
And I think the arts, it's when it's done right, it's so easy to take for granted because you can't, it looks so easy,
Mm-hmm.
not realizing all of the thought and calculation and the practice and like the psychological analysis and the historical analysis and whatever else goes into making it so seamless that you can get lost and forget for a moment that that person isn't actually that person, that
Mm-hmm.
they just animated a completely fictitious creature. So if it's done right, you sit back and you're like, oh, well,
Anybody, yeah,
anybody can do that. And
that's
it's so
right.
easy to criticize and
That's
pull
a sign of good
apart.
acting, right? Yeah, because if you see shitty
So
acting, you're just like,
when something's off,
Yeah.
it all we're triggered to remember the bad. We're triggered to
Yeah.
like pick point when something feels off because it helps keep us safe. So if something's wrong, you're like, oh, I'm gonna zero in on that. Forget all the other good stuff that's happening, like fine, whatever. But there's one thing that happened bad. Oh, I'm gonna hang on to that.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Tommy Wiseau in The Room. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's like a neoclassic because, and I like the movie. I mean, you've got to handicap it, but but it became this big punchline, But I think nested within in that, yes, there is bad acting, bad writing, and things like that. But it's sweet and it does its job, right? So it's like it has its virtues, no matter how you frame it, so like I think that's a subversive win for Tommy Wiseau, even though he wanted to do a really serious, intense film and it just became this thing. And then but then it aged a certain way, I think. And if I watched it again, I'd probably still cringe a little bit, but I think it just grew on me, it's like, oh,
Well,
in fact,
that just goes down the art conversation. Like even this conversation we're having here, once it's out there to all you beautiful YouTube and your
right, go
audio
off in the
listeners,
world. Yeah,
it's yours. It's not ours anymore. And whatever
Yep.
it means to you and whatever you take away from it, it becomes whatever it needs to become. And it's it's just out of our control.
Yeah.
And same with The Room. It's art. It didn't quite go the way he planned. Can't win them all, but maybe it was just enough bad things together to make a cohesive, beautiful something else.
Yeah. It's kind of like ugly dogs. Some people think like certain types of dog breeds are gorgeous and beautiful, and other, subjectivity, right? So, but anyway, well, it's not quite. That's not a really good analogy, but it's maybe close. It's like some people think those what are those Chinese crested dogs are gorgeous, and other people are like, what? Yeah. What kind of aberration of God and nature is that thing? So it's all in the eye of the beholder, I guess. So anyway, but I thought I'd throw Tommy in there and give him some credit because I loved it. It charmed me from the first watch. And I only watched it one time, but and I know it kind of was a whatever you want to call it, but anyway. So I would like to get into what we were talking about earlier when you introduced yourself. We were talking about the Middlescent podcast, and but before we do that, did we want to close out your career bio, your aspirations, what it is you want to do? Was there anything you wanted to add before we move into that?
No, I think like everything else, it'll naturally either show up again because it will work its way into Middlescent.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true. All right,
so
I just didn't want to do
All
right. I didn't want to do a hard segue. Good. Yeah, I didn't want to do a hard segue there and just go, okay, well, enough of that, let's move on. But yes, let's talk about Middlescent. And what's nice is we're maybe 13 years apart. So we're going to have unique perspectives on the subject of what you call Middlescence. And when I heard that portmanteau, I thought that's just beautiful. That's really neat. And it deserves attention. Certainly not, I'll bring a little bit of attention to it, but it in your work and what you produce, it deserves that attention. For the guests that you bring on, for the discussions that are had, I think there is importance to that. And so I'm glad to be able to be a part of that in this, like you said, this creation that we're midwiving and turning out into the world. So can you set us up with what Middlescence is, and then now that we just found out about your aims and ambitions in acting, we'll find out about what your aims and ambitions are in this child that you've created, this creation of yours.
So I'm trying to think of how to approach this because I could give you that beautiful transition of saying in the acting industry where age and appearance, and especially for women, it's very important and very much behind. It's up front of the conversation. It's also behind because it is where we kind of set the tone for what society expects and the lessons that we learn. And so there is that aspect. So I'll just start with what middlescent is about and where I came up with it. So middlescent itself is kind of a term I created. So let's break that down.
Mm-hmm.
And I took it from adolescent. And now we're living longer. So there's this like second coming of age, and we don't really have the marking for it. We didn't really, it just doesn't exist. So I've decided we're calling it middlescence instead of the midlife crisis. And there really wasn't much of a term for whatever happens to women besides you go through menopause, which is like that 1 year, and then whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you're just having a breakdown, you're just being a woman and you're crazy. It's that hysteria notion all over again.
Gaslighting.
Yeah. All over again. Yes, you're a woman, so clearly it's just hysteria.
It's your hormones.
Get a vibrator and move on.
That's right. Deal with it.
Exactly. So that's where so that's the term middlescent. It comes from that. And it's my kind of attempt to create that, to not create, but to really stop and celebrate and pay attention to the second coming of age. And with that led me down some other conversations I really wanted to have, because in addition to having the second coming of age, actually, I'll wait till all the sounds stop. Okay, I hope the door is closed. Okay.
There you go. Live television. Click.
Let me start that again.
Yeah, take scene 1, take 2.
So,
Ayelet, the actress here, recovering a scene. Sorry.
So basically, it's that second coming of age, which then led me to the other, what I felt was missing in our society, and again comes with us living so much longer. And back in the good old tribal days, and even we're small town, I don't know exactly when it stopped, but we did have a time where community was still very present. And there was a group of people, I don't know if it was a job that they were given to just sit around and contemplate and say, oh, well, there was just a birth. We should come up with some traditions and some like action steps or rituals to commemorate that we just gained another member of our community.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we have things like baby showers, and you have if there was midwives, or all these conversations were had of how do we honor the person going through this life change, and how do we honor the community that's now also going through a change by either gaining, losing, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. We have that for funerals, we have it for weddings, because a wedding it's not actually about the couple. Let's be honest. It's not for them. Yeah. It's for the community that just gained another functioning unit that is going to potentially have more kids to grow our community for better survival, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have all these amazing traditions, like you walk around, the bride walks around the groom 7 times to symbolize this, that, or the other, depending on the religion or how you want to do it. But we have all of these. Somebody took the time to sit and say, what is important? What do we want to commemorate? Let's take a moment and say, the community just gained another family unit. Mm-hmm. Same with, the bar mitzvahs or other, the first like coming of age when you become an adult, fully functioning member. That's the community gaining an adult member. Now, if we look at today, society has just gone way beyond that. Divorce is super prevalent, but we don't have a tradition around that. Community just gained 2 more fully functioning, much wiser, I might add, with experience,
hopefully,
adults who are ready to now form another unit that might be better, or maybe not. Maybe they have a different function, but we haven't taken the time to really say, okay, first of all, there's a loss. There needs to be some sort of grieving process. What does that look like? I don't have the answer. That's kind of why I created Middlescent, to have the conversations with people so we can start that conversation. And my hope is through all of our discussions and what people bring up, and as listeners tune in, maybe they come up with something and say, you know what? Burning, a love letter to the relationship that was, or to the future I just lost, is one way that they can cope with it. Might inspire someone else to say like, yeah, that actually really makes sense. But I would like to have all of my girlfriends around for a glass of wine as we read the love letter out loud for the future that I'm now like releasing. That's my tradition. And someone else might take that on or not, doesn't matter. But we need to come up with ways to kind of take a moment and really honor these life phases, these changes that are happening. I think it's also a cry to get community back. I feel like with everything that's evolving, we've kind of lost a little bit of that. I don't think it's all across the world. I feel like it's maybe more of in the Western world where we've become more and more isolated. And that's unfortunate because we're missing that challenge and the different perspectives so we can grow as human beings in ourselves and be more well-rounded and better able to handle everything that life is throwing at us. But also to be able to be there for one another. Like, I know when I was dealing with my father had fallen down while bike riding, and he was in a vegetative state for 3 years. It's not a death, so we don't do the funeral, but there's nothing. Nobody took the time to say, okay, well, now that we have modern medicine, and now that there's this limbo state where you're still grieving the loss because the relationship I had with him, that was gone. That's been changed. I needed to create a new relationship. But in the moments that it was happening, I do remember in those first few days when we weren't quite sure what was going on, friends and family came to visit us when we were sitting in the hospital, and they started sharing stories and laughing and joking. And it did resemble very much what a Shiva looks like without having the formal, proper funeral part to it. But then it kind of dwindled and petered away. And then anytime I would bring it up and say, oh no, he's in this rehab facility, not here, not there, and nobody knew how. There was no protocol, like, how do we comfort you? And so you start to see the reaction of like deer in the headlights, and then it puts me in a position where I have to comfort them. And then I don't know if my experience being when you're dealing with those things, like I also had with PTSD, where I felt like I needed to comfort people around me, and so then I can't be taken care of when I'm the one who in some of those instances wouldn't even know how to ask for what I need. So it would be really helpful if we had like when it comes to it, you bring food, you like sit down and you tell a couple of good stories and you've done your part, and like community members know that how to be there for one another. The people going through it get to take a moment and celebrate or commemorate or whatever they need to do with what they're dealing with, be it a big joy or sadness or whatever that is. But when you have the kind of guideline of like, okay, here's the rough guideline of how we can manage this, I feel like we're missing that a little bit, and I want to bring it back.
I think ritual is such a cohesive system or practice that, as you pointed out and what you were saying, that we become sort of fractured as we became a larger society, a more connected society, that I think even the capacity to have ritual or ceremony or process that does bind and bond, or whatever the right word is there, people to forward the communal relationship. I think this connectivity that we find ourselves in with mass media, with social media, all these kind of things, it's very difficult, I think, and it's almost like a rediscovery project needs to be underway or launched or enacted by folks like yourself to do that. And then in outlier cases like somebody in a coma, what does a ritual look like for that? What does what's the right word? Non-traditional. I guess it is traditional though, because it happens all the time to a lot of people, right? People in the situation like your father.
All of these, like, I'm not saying we have to now stop and make yes, there is the case for mindfulness and taking a moment to commemorate and motivate and celebrate everything. And I'm not taking away from that, but I'm also not going to that extreme. But divorce is something that happens a lot. Now with medicine, as it continues and we have prolonged life, that's happening a lot. So I just want to, before we move on, go back to one more point, because we were talking about women and middle age and hitting that, and why women specifically, because that's the third part of it. And I do think that in tribal times, it was the middle-aged women who were the keepers of that knowledge, and they were most likely the ones coming up with the traditions, most likely the ones passing along the traditions, kind of the thing where you hear somebody ask, well, why did you bake the chocolate cake in a square pan and not a round one? Like, well, because that's how my mom always did it.
Right.
And so that tradition of the square chocolate cake just kind of gets passed along. So I think middle-aged women are the keepers of the knowledge, and in modern society, it has become sort of that middle-aged women are non-existent. They're dried up. We kind of don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. With every birthday around me, I love birthdays. I'm actually celebrating on Saturday.
Happy birthday to you. Early birthday wishes. This is being recorded on a Thursday, so we are nigh on the occasion here. So.
And with every, like, I don't care about the number or the age. I'm going to be 41. It's a number.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Right.
And around me, I hear this like, oh my God, I'm going to be 30. Oh,
yeah.
It's so old. Oh, I'm over the hill. Life is over now.
Yeah.
Or the other extreme of constantly being asked, oh my God, what's your secret? How do you like look so young for your age? And I don't know, not care about the number. That's my secret. Drink a lot of water.
Right.
Sure
one less thing to be stressed about. Yeah.
If I care about it, I think that's probably the issue, the fact that I don't care. So I don't feel a number. I'm the 5-year-old spirit with an 80-year-old soul and 41 years of wear and tear. That's what I got. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I saw a meme a couple of years ago and it said, inside of every old person's a young person, like wondering what the F happened. It's a little extreme of what you were just saying, but I thought of that meme and it's like, it's true. I feel like I've always been around 21, that's always been my freeze age, and I'll be that way until I die, and if I lose that, oh my, something, it'll be a head trauma or something. But yeah, it's like, it's not faded, and it's weird in a way. Like, is it arrested development? Is it the spirit, within you? Like you said, that's age defying. It's like, I don't give a shit. I'll be 54 this year and whatever. It doesn't mean anything to me.
The number is a number, but yet the industry that I've like marched myself into.
Oh, yeah.
Puts a lot of importance on that number and on the number that you represent and the stories it's getting better. I can't say that it hasn't. And there are so many women who are working so hard to embrace the gray and I can't remember, all the ageless. And I actually had a guest who is pro-aging, talking about all of shifting that conversation, because there are great stories. There aren't enough stories about women hitting middle age. So as we're growing up, it kind of becomes this void that you don't want to get near, because it's a black hole that'll just swallow you up and you don't know what happens until you get spit out the other end as like a 90-year-old cute little grandmother like that. Then you're relevant again, but in between, not interesting anymore. So I want to change that perception as well. So it's middle-aged women who I think have so much information and so much knowledge and so much that we can gain from hearing those stories and hearing them out, and also that have the wisdom and the experience to have the conversations about like, how do we take care of each other in divorce, in career changing? Like, it doesn't have to be necessarily grief or tragedy. I mean, divorce can also be a big celebration. I could see that being a big party. And other things like reaching a certain age. And you know what? Everything I've studied and everything I've worked in, I'm going to do a 180 and flip my career right now. Whatever that is. There might be a ritual there that we can look to.
Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, the middle-aged set of women in that middle-aged space, and I'll use a weird word here, but they're sort of this supervening force. They're this force that comes from above to form and to guide and to steer people in their late teens to mid 20s. So, and of course, people are getting married older and yada, yada, but catch the spirit of what I'm saying, that in those, as they would say for women, nubile years, the marrying years, and for boys as well, that supervening force from the wise ones, from the ones who will say, you're being impulsive. Think about this, cool off a little bit. Do you want to marry? and we can give you sage and you'll probably ignore it, but at least we can have a good laugh about it in 7 or 8 years if the marriage falls apart. But anyway, there's this, to me, I see that, and I'm ensconced in middle age myself, and my peers are middle age. And so seeing that as a force of influence for the younger generation, preceding generation, has so much power and value. Whether it's being actualized or not, I don't know. And, it's a case by case with culture and community. I'm sure in some areas it's prevalent. In other areas, like in the United States, not so much. Like you said, they're just these shriveled up old things that get cast aside. And on that matter of middle-aged woman and female empowerment, I watched a new Natalie Merchant video the other day, and I was like, oh my God, I've always adored Natalie Merchant. She's just such a gorgeous woman. And she was just her. I think she's 60 or 61 this year. I think she was born in 63. So she's just absolutely glowing, flawless, beautiful, but she's 63, right? But I grew up with her as, she was in the 10,000 Maniacs when I was a teenager and yada, yada. And so she's just so beautiful. And I know Justine Bateman just wrote a book, and she's in that same age range. She's probably 62, 63. And she just wrote a book on aging naturally and gracefully. So I think there's traction there. I think there's a way to
the conversation is happening, and I definitely, because every time I bring it up, I hear more and more like, oh, you should talk to this other one who's embracing the gray, and this other woman who's showing that aging shouldn't be feared, and another one who's showing about like how to take care of yourself. So yeah, it's definitely becoming, because as we discussed, there's going to be more and more people in that group.
Yeah.
And we're all sitting around going like, we have a lot more life to live than we previously thought about.
Yeah.
Not everyone's going to go quietly.
No. And I think, one thing that needs to perhaps be brought into the conversation is the fetishization, I said that without tripping over it, and youth-obsessed culture. And some of it's marketing, some of it's Madison Avenue or Hollywood. And, can you keep selling that to people? I don't know. Because there's the psychology there that, and no woman over 40 should ever give a shit about what a 22-year-old looks like. It doesn't matter. And for myself, and I probably don't speak for very many men, I look at 22-year-old so-called, beautiful fashion model-y kind of women, and it's great, but I'm 53, and so they look like something that could be my child, so I can't fetishize those people anymore. But I'm weird, so maybe some men of my age are preverts, and they look at those girls and they fetishize them, and that's, I don't judge, whatever. But for me, I think women in my age range are just absolutely gorgeous, and I just don't, and starting with my wife, and moving out to just women that I see all the time, and so I don't have that lens of saying, oh my, it's like women from 45 to 70, or there's some absolutely gorgeous women in that age range, and that needs to be appreciated. And of course, I'm speaking shallow aestheticism here, but it's comprehensive to me. It's the spirit of the woman, of the person, the man, whatever, and what they express, and the wisdom, like you said, the wisdom they bring to that. So in other words, to conclude, there is a gold mine of potential in there, not to be realized by younger people, but within our own community, our own system of that psychology and emotion and persona within 45 to 70. We'll just get real broad there, or 40 to 70, however you want to frame that. Yeah. So now that I'm in it, I see it, and it's like, wow, how could this not be capture? How could this not be marketable? And I don't mean that in a crude capitalistic sense, but like marketable in what you do, in the stories that can be told. And that's perhaps another reason we can come back to, are you going to think about production and direction and having your own studio, your own company, so that you are empowered to produce these kind of things, damn the numbers as far as what other people are trying to say. Well, oh, you got to have a 23-year-old there, and she's got to be stacked, and all that bullshit that they talk about for selling tickets. Maybe it's not about selling tickets. So I'll stop there. Just let you pick up on it. But I'm just trying to point out that I think this is a huge potential that may have not been realized in the boomer generation, that may not be necessarily realizable in the Gen X, my generation, but maybe when millennials come on board. As I said earlier, you're in that liminal space between the two, and you could be a spearhead to that, to make this salient and acknowledged to those people who are moving into that space. So I'll stop there. That's probably a good place to stop.
I'm not sure what to respond to or to answer to and all that, but I'll
do my best. I threw a lot at you, and I apologize.
Because there's a few things that I picked up there. One, going back to society, the industry, and what we're being sold to, and one of the conversations I had recently were we're both products of the 90s, which gave us this kind of education that we need a man to choose us in order to be worthy or valuable. And also, if I look at, I'm auditioning now for something where I had to dress in different decades, and I'm looking at like 70s and 80s and 90s and thinking, well, the 80s allowed for a lot more curves than say the 70s or the 90s, so I'm gonna pick that one. But growing, looking at also the style and the heroin chic and all these things where we didn't have this. And then comes also the question for the newer generations, and with someone else I spoke to who has daughters in this age, talking about the filter perfect world of Instagram, where it's gone like beyond what we just had. A bunch of fashion magazines that told us you needed to look this certain way, which was already impossible in order to be valuable somehow.
Right.
It didn't matter what we accomplish until a man gives us the value because we were chosen for some sort of happily ever after. But that aside, so there's that part of it. The fetishizing of, only good stories happen to people in their 20s, or at least to the women who are in their 20s.
Right.
They're happening to a man who's the actual main character.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we have to look up to. And if those are the characters and the stories that we look up to, I can also understand why, if someone in your immediate circle or your life doesn't look like that and says, hey, I did once actually, and I can give you a little bit of mentorship around that, because at least I can save you from falling on your face the way I did. I mean, you can fall on your face just a few steps later.
Right.
But let me save you those few steps.
Yeah.
And we just don't want to hear it because you don't look like the thing on the screen. So it is and as you talked about, following the almighty dollar, for better or for worse, especially in capitalistic society, which has now become super global, that is the thing that rules. So you do look at, will it sell? And I know a lot of stories, unless you're really clever, and I can share a little inside story, but for a lot of movies and scripts to get passed, you have to either connect it to something that already succeeded somehow, and then maybe they'll consider it. Or that's why there's all these reboots and regurgitating all this nostalgia, because they want a safe bet. They want something that'll bring in money. And as far as what people knew and understood up until a certain point is, that's what sells. Sex sells, and that comes in the package of a young woman. And that's what we've got. And I do think that, once again, like, I don't know if you've seen it now, the series The Offer, which is all about how The Godfather was, like, the behind the scenes and the making of The Godfather, which is a turning point in Hollywood in terms of what stories were selling. And they do a beautiful job. Yes, there's a lot of truth, and there's also a lot of just storytelling for the sake of good storytelling.
Okay.
But it does a beautiful job of showing the different forces that come together towards making a movie, which is the production that only cares about how much money is it going to make me. And if it doesn't have the right, like, already well-known actor, it's not going to go. So we're not going to invest in this thing if you don't want to put something that I know for sure is going to return. And then other considerations and the push and pull, and the artists who really just want to tell a good story, and they want to do it right, and they want to do the art the way it should be done. All these forces that are pulling, and for The Godfather, that specific era is when the certain factory of Hollywood of just churning out, like, okay, we have man, woman, beautiful background, love story, fantastic, it's gonna make money, push it out, make the money. And the audience was getting tired of that. So now new things were becoming like Godfather, like the others. That nobody could predict, because it's art, and we don't know what the audience is going to like on a Tuesday because the sun was shining when they went to the theater that day, or not. And I think we're in that phase again, where up until now, the 20-something-year-old woman that's the object for the main character, who's a man, to come after, is what sells, is starting to not be interesting anymore. And now they're losing their secure footing and having to find something new. And I do think with all of the women who already have a lot of background in the industry and know how it works, like Reese Witherspoon has her own production company and focusing on women-driven stories, are changing. So we are going to start to see that shift on what audiences actually go for. Now it's just a matter of chicken and the egg until they catch up and say, oh, it actually does make money.
Okay.
It's actually okay to invest in these stories. And on the other side of it, with the conversations I'm having around Middlescent and the people I speak to, especially women in this age range, that aren't seeing enough stories, as I said, about women in middle age, like the things that they deal with, which is menopause, which is changing career, or there's some book, I can't remember the name of the author right now, where she was talking about having been post-menopause and finally being able to have sex for the sheer pleasure and not with the agenda of having kids or something else. Is like this weird experience. And I read that and I was like, wow, I'm pretty sure that's a common story, but I haven't seen it at all anywhere.
Yeah, I think especially in Catholic culture, you know, if you're fertile, every sperm is sacred, you know, that whole thing. Yeah, it's like, what a relief. I'm not menstruating anymore. Oh boy, you know,
now,
light the
now you
candles.
could just like, you don't have to be a factory for making more humans. You can actually just enjoy it for the sake of enjoying it.
Imagine that. Yeah. Jeez.
And thinking about like, I haven't reached menopause yet, so I don't know what that experience is like, but even hearing that already kind of gives me something more bright to look forward to.
Right.
And the flip side of that is because there isn't enough talked about it, like we were joking earlier about the creation of vibrators came out of women not being able to orgasm, and they just were declared
hysterical. Yeah. And a
And
doctor would have to do it. Was a medical person. That's just so surreal, right? Okay, ma'am, this is going to hurt you more than, no, wait, I say that to the people I'm about to amputate. Whatever. Yeah, that's just so surreal. The old,
And the fact is, like, I can't, this is too much work having so many appointments in a day. Let's create a machine to do it faster for me, so I don't have to deal with it.
Right, manual stimulation. Yeah, a very strange time in our history. Yeah, these poor women. Yeah. And then there were women like Annie Besant, who is one of my heroes. And I want to make sure wait, am I confusing her with Ira Craddock? Oh dear, I'm getting my superheroes mixed up. Ira Craddock. Annie Besant was a theosophist anarchist in England. Ira Craddock was a troublemaker in New York in the 1890s, and she was teaching married couples how to have good sex. And she happened to fall, the attention was drawn to her by Comstock, was the attorney at the mayor of New York at the time. And there's actually an archaic term called Comstockery, where this pious prick named Comstock, who was mayor, persecuted Ira Craddock for obscenity and pornography and all these different things, just because she had the audacity to teach young married couples how to have enjoyable union and things like that. And so there's a great story back there if you're into esoteric feminism and strange feminism. That she's a great story to read about. But yeah, that was her thing. She was teaching sensuality to women of the breeding years, but nonetheless, you know, let's make it fun and don't just be a receiver, you know, and have a good time. But anyway, I'm digressing. And Annie Besant is worth looking up too. She was a sort of fly in the ointment for religiosity and structure, and she was a pistol. So I love those kind of people. Yeah. Troublemaker, uppity. Oh yeah, Annie Besant and Ira Craddock. You can
Ira Craddock.
Ira Craddock, Craddock. They're on my list of superheroes for in the women's category. And Boudica, of course. Boudica is like a hero of mine. She was that Celtic queen, Icenian queen, and she was had a run-in with the Romans. They raped her daughters, and it was a matriarchal society, but they raped her daughters just to make a point. And she said no, and she got into skirmishes with the Romans, and she made their lives really miserable in the 1st or 2nd century CE in what is now like the London area of the UK.
Okay.
Boudica is another interesting one. So she's in my top 5 of female superheroes, action heroes. She ended up meeting her ends because the Romans had superior fighting tactics like phalanx war, and they were just a bunch of crazy savage Celtics, and it didn't work out so good. But she was their gadfly for a long time, and made things miserable for him. So I'm sorry I'm digressing, but let's bring it back to
circle background. So yes, there was that hysteria there, and what I was going to say is the new giant label, because there isn't enough conversation, there isn't enough discussed about it, is menopause. If we look at adolescence and adolescence officially defined by when you hit puberty, and when you get into the menstrual cycle, then adolescence might be that eventually scientifically we define it like once you're postmenopause. I don't know. For now, I'm leaving it very vague. Adolescence is when you feel like you've reached middle age, whatever that is for you. But that menopause for many women is because there's not enough conversation around it. There's not enough material. There's not enough education. The experience of it is horrifying because you just don't know what's going on. And for the men in these people's lives is also horrifying because there is no how do I navigate this? What is happening? And not making it mean things about themselves or making it mean about someone else. Like in some conversations I've had, even the question comes up whether or not some divorces could have been prevented had we known a little bit more about all the changes that are happening, and that these mood shifts and perceptions and whatever else is going on is just part of the process. And that person that you fell in love with hasn't gone hysterical. You don't need to shove a vibrator their way and send them off.
Exactly. Go to your room and take your vibrator.
It might just be like this ups and downs you got to deal with for this year or whatever, and it'll be fine. Or if you work, whatever that is, we just don't know. There aren't enough conversations. So that's another aspect. And I think with anything, like a lot of the vices and addictions and the spiraling and things we go on down to, and also the hate and conflict, is just because we're not talking enough. We're just not talking to each other. I'm not saying that everybody has to agree with every single guest or agree with my point of view. You don't have to. I just want to hear your point of view, and I would like to be heard, and that's it. And who knows what can come out of the more we talk and discuss. And by hearing stories from women who've gone through it, I sit there just like, oh, tell me more, because at least now I have that kind of calm of like, okay, I have an idea of what's to come. And I have a new way to frame kind of what's happening, instead of the rug being pulled out from under your feet one day and you're just like, why am I just angry? It's kind of like makes me think of when I was with PTSD. Had it for probably 4 years. I just had no idea. And for those 4 years of walking around, I was working in an area that was getting rocket bombs as a civilian working in high tech. So not much I can do to defend myself. And not really having, and I didn't have my family. I had moved across the globe, so they were in the States and the time zones were different. So I was basically trying to deal with it on my own, already not a smart idea. So I was very much to myself, and that just spiraled more and more. And I had no idea that I was stuck in this like freeze survival mode for so long. And I had all this energy, and the way that it came across is I would get in a carpool to the new job with these new lovely coworkers that I see as friends, and we actually hang out outside of work. And they would get into some mundane conversation about a TV show they liked or didn't like. And the whole time I was just angry. I was just so angry at them. And I'm not a very angry person, but I was just angry all the time. And I didn't have an answer, which just leads to more and more. And I feel the same comes when you hit certain things. Like if there isn't a conversation about not having an orgasm as a woman, well, hysteria is a good enough explanation. It doesn't make you feel any better. Menopause comes around, and while you're going through it, there really isn't much of an explanation. So you just start to look at, okay, well, what's wrong with me? And I think it just compounds and leads to no good. So these conversations, beyond just coming up with rituals, beyond making getting old exciting so that every birthday is like, oh my God, I can't wait to be whatever it is. Like, I can't wait to be 41. That too. And for, as we said, for any generation, wherever you're at on the spectrum, either share the wisdom that you had and listen to somebody who it has been where you were about to go, to give you that kind of like, here's just rough suggestions of what you can hope to experience. Yours will be unique to you, but at least it gives you some sort of sense of like, oh, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy.
Yep. It's being able to compare the story and say, yes, it's fitting, it's matching. I like to tell younger people these days that I have this funny saying, it's like old people are messengers from the future and young people are explorers of the future. And so there's a nice match there. And so if the young people are willing and capable to listen to the older person, that sage will be imparted. And so I could say to a 25-year-old, I know what the 30s are going to be like, and this is some things you can do to brace yourself for the 30s, or joyfully anticipate the 30s, because they're probably one of your best decades, and depending situationally, of course. But you can pass that on, and somebody who's 75 can say to me, well, I know what your 60s are going to be like, and this is what you ought to start thinking about and prioritizing, so that you pass through those years with less friction or more pleasantly, or however you want to contextualize that. So ritual, and then seeing the value in what can be exchanged in conversation with people, again, who are supervening upon you with wisdom, coming down from the top down and saying, I've walked the path ahead of you, and I've stopped for a moment to turn around and say, okay, there are loose rocks here, and there's ice over here.
And I can save you a lot of grief.
Yeah, you don't want to fall, just.
Well, and as you were sharing, like by giving kind of the let me help you prepare, because how many conversations have you had where someone said, oh, if I'd only known that when I was younger, I could have set myself up for a better, like, today. And of course, yes, we're also limited by whatever we knew at the time. But if we look at, say, diet and exercise and the health culture and the amount of information that we have today on how our body functions that we didn't have growing up, and you look back and you're like, oh, if I'd only known, I could have prevented so much damage, or I could have arrived with so much more muscle mass, or I could have invested in the bank of my longevity ages ago so that I could reap the benefits now.
Yeah. That's the wisdom showing up ahead of time, preemptive wisdom showing up there, that you can plan ahead. And, I think as individuals, it's easier to be a planning person and being a long-term goals person. I don't think we do it so well as groups, but that's a whole nother podcast show. But, I just think that it's easy and less complicated as an individual. Again, if your eyes are up and you're willing to listen and learn from others, like you said, to prepare yourself to enter into just like a sacred ritual. You have to do cleansing rites and prostrations and different things to make sure that you are ready to enter into that. It's no different in passage in time into the older you that will be here before you know it. And one thing I was thinking about when you were just talking is some cultures, we were talking about tradition and cultural ritual and practice, is that and I can't, other than Japan, I can't think of too many examples, is filial piety, or respect for the elders, the reverence for the elders. And it's not just processorial or ceremonial. It is meant to do things. It's meant to achieve outcomes. And I think one of those, again, is to honor your old folks, and not just like we do in the United States, shove them in an assisted living facility and see them on Christmas and that's it, or Hanukkah or whatever. And, and it's just, extracting from those folks what they learned as messengers from the future. And if we can rediscover that, or whatever it is, whatever the process is, further the discovery, enrich the discovery, however that works, that I think is valuable. I think that just lends itself to what we've been talking about, is having that reverence, but not contrived, just genuine feeling, like love, like two partners loving each other. It's family love. It's so the phila form of love, not the eros form of love, but the phila, the attraction of love. So anyway,
I was gonna bring it back to, I don't know, full circle to acting and the movie industry and the storytelling. because as human beings, storytelling is so unique to us. Like I don't see my cat telling, maybe she's telling stories when she's meowing, I don't know.
Yeah.
But as far as I can tell, the story pretty much revolves around, is it treat time? It's not treat time. How about now?
Food.
That's it.
Yeah.
Like food.
Food.
We are kind of as far as we're aware, the only creatures who really sit around telling stories using our imagination. And a big part of that, yes, was survival for tribes, because when you went out into the field, especially women, which I think is why we are the chatterboxes, is that we would go out into the field gathering, and we'd have to come back and relay the information of like, well, that patch is poisoned, don't go there. And if you go there, you know, when the men come back at the end of the hunt, they sit around the fire and then they start telling stories about, oh, this amazing heroic thing I just did. Because as you're listening, our brain takes it as if we've gone through it. We've already dress rehearsed that scenario. So when it happens, you're ready to go. And this kind of comes into why, just to solidify how our brain works this way, like when I used to work as a volunteer as an EMT on ambulances. And so CPR is something that very rarely happens, but you train the most for. One, because it's the golden like minute. You only have so much time to really keep all those organs functioning and viable.
Right.
So it's really crucial that you know what to do. But if you just keep repeating it and keep repeating it, the same with acting, and keep repeating so that you can let go of the conscious thinking and go into kind of like just naturally do it. Because when you're in those moments, and I did actually have a few CPR calls, you do go into this weird state where your perception of time shifts, because now every bit of information is crucial. So your brain just catalogs it all, and you could just watch your hands just go. Like you don't even realize what you're doing, or just doing it because you need to be able to automatically do it. And in the training, it's other people who have gone through it who now will share, okay, well, this is where you put your hands, and this is how you count, and this is how you do the breathing. And you hear their stories of, I had a call like this and I had a call like that. And so you get to rehearse and dress rehearse these major moments. And I think that's why story is so important. I think that's why movies then took place of the storyteller. And so now we watch other fictitious creatures going through scenarios that we may have to face one day. And since we watch them go through it, we're like, oh, okay, well, that's how they handled it. And that's how it worked out for them, for better, worse, good, bad, doesn't matter. But we got to see one scenario that we've already kind of dress rehearsed in our brain. We've gone through it once by watching that film or watching that movie, and now we can better navigate. And so by listening to people's stories and bringing those stories forward through my podcast or through potential movies or whatever is going to be written in the future, or having all these women out there who are calling attention to loving aging and going gray and telling the stories that are more relevant to what they're experiencing on the day-to-day. As we're watching it, we're like, oh, okay, well, now that I've seen an example, I know what that looks like. I've kind of just rehearsed it. I can talk about it now. It's that storytelling. So I think it's important, like, just to bring it back around to, that's why we have movies, and that's why we do have that function of the love for the elder, because they come back with these amazing, going back to Jim Henson and his show, The Storyteller. I don't know if you have seen it or heard about it. It was very brief. It was Storyteller, which had folk tales, the original like German version of Cinderella, kind of a mishmash of that, or like an old Celtic tale, all these old folk tales that he did more with the Dark Crystal Labyrinth style Muppets and live action. And the second one was the Greek myths. The point I'm bringing it up, not only to tie back to Jim Henson, is that the opening to The Storyteller, John Hurt has a little monologue that says that the most important, the most coveted place by the fire was reserved for the storyteller. So I think as humans, as a society, having the wise old person who sits by the fire and tells you the tales, whether they're all true or slightly augmented for our benefit or for their benefit, doesn't matter. The stories we sit and are so engaged in, I think it's because it serves a purpose much greater than we give it credit.
Yeah. And that I think there's two things or more perhaps going on there, that it is informative. It is, it's a teaching means, but it's also a means of activating imagination, which can then, things can spring from that, things can move out from that. And then in that imagination comes creativity, and comes novelty, new ways of maybe gathering something, or pursuing a prey, or whatever it was, whatever our agendas were, 17,000 years ago or whatever, when we're less sedentary and more nomadic and tribal and things like that. Yeah. And so that probably helped with our cognitive enhancement, is the automaticity that's drawn out of that, the ritual and repetition and things. And as a violinist, I've heard cogsci people talk about, if a musician actually in full swing of doing whatever they're doing stopped and thought about the what they're doing, like the physics, or finger placement, or am I in the right key or tone, or, no, yeah, just boom, it would fall apart. You have to, like you said, when you're doing CPR, you enter into this other flow state, and it's
Well,
yeah.
After having, as you said, like there is that learning rehearsal time when it's either learning lines or understanding the backstory, or if it's the violin, figuring out where does the finger need to go, and is it sharp, is it flat, what kind of bowings, and you're working, if it's solo or with an orchestra, how to make that all mesh. But when it comes time to the performance, you've done it so many times. And I don't know, I assume others experience the same. It's that, like, they talk about it like the flow state, where you start playing, and so I'm very conscious and aware when the conductor lifts the baton to go, okay, that's beat one. And then the piece ends, and I kind of don't remember what happened in between.
Yeah.
You just, I was there, but I wasn't really there. Like, I was very in control, but I was also not at all. Something else took over.
Another
And
part
I
of
couldn't,
Ayelet.
and it's true, the second that I like my brain tries to step in and be like, oh no, remember, you need to move it up higher or lower, everything falls apart, because that's it, I've lost it. And once you miss that, I could pick it up again, but still, like, in those moments, that's when it falls apart, because you're no longer in that flow state. And it is, maybe that's a non like verbal way of retelling the story, because there are, at least for famous pieces, if it's something that's never been played before, we're off to figure it out ourselves. But if it's something that's been played before, I have so many examples of other artists who have told how to, what kind of emotion, the speed, the like volume, if they're going louder, softer, techniques, if they're going to use pizzicato or whatever, to tell the story of that piece of music. So I get to listen to those who've gone before me and take from their performances. And I can't tell you how it all files through, the same way anybody listening to this can't really pinpoint what they heard when we were talking that went like, oh, that just inspired how I'm going to make breakfast tomorrow. Like, something that I've heard from these other artists, like Itzhak Perlman or whoever else who've played the piece before. And when I go to play it, I take a little bit of what I learned from them and then add whatever the next step is from what I bring from myself and whatever the group I'm working with, the dynamics, the circumstances. But at least I've had that storyteller before me.
Yeah. It's a template of sorts, I guess, to frame what you're about to do. Well, not frame, but in a loose kind of sense, that it just helps to move you through that, on top of your own talent and your own work that you do.
And I think it's a very important part of creativity, like the idea that innovation and creativity is something completely brand new that's never been done before. Everything is built upon something else. It could be a mishmash of 20, 50 other things that are now brought together that have never been brought together before, but those things were there that were just now brought together. And it made me think of, like, there's you need to know the rules before you break them. So on the one hand, yes, I have all these amazing storytellers and the love of those who've gone before me, who have invested so much time in that craft that I can now watch and learn from. And I can either take it as is and just try to at least get that right, or I can take that and say, that's amazing, but that's not for me. I'm going to do it this way because I think that something needs to change, or it has to be something inside me is calling to do it differently.
Yeah. And I think that's a freedom that you should have in artistic expression or creativity. Now, needless to say, you can't paint over somebody's painting and say, "Oh, now it looks the way I want it." But music should have that flexibility and that fluidity of a little bit of personal input and interpretation, maybe to do it in a slightly different way, a variation, as they say, variations on the theme. So, I think we've given the audience a good amount of things to think about and work on, but I do want to make sure that we close this out the right way. I'm going to have links down below to your website, and I can amend down the road. So this is April of 2023. Let's talk about your launching the podcast. Let's talk about I'll have what is necessary to get to that podcast. But if any other thing that you want to share relating to what your project is, let's do that. And then that way it's comprehensive. It's part of this conversation.
Is there anything specific you think that would be helpful?
Let's see. Well, so again, it is April, I think, what is this? The 13th of April, 2023. So when this is first goes out, are you live? Is the rubber on the road now with your podcast, or are you getting ready to launch?
No,
okay,
we're
so you're
still in pre-launch, having lots of amazing conversations, but in the pre-editing and gathering all the show notes, I want to make sure we have enough good material to get started. So once it's out, you have something to sink your teeth into.
Okay.
And I'll update with an official launch date once that's ready. Looking at definitely in the next few months for sure.
Okay, so probably summer of this year. And so again, I can amend the description field to include your launch product. But when I include your website down there, that space is already there. It's just not activated. So that'll be there. But I can also put in an amendment that says, okay, Ayelet's live and rolling, and go over there and show her some love and some support, especially if you're a middle-escent like myself. And I think those, I just I see it having a lot of relevance and traction because people age, and there's a whole lot of people, like I said this earlier before we started recording, my generation's a little smaller, and you're on that cusp of this next generation coming up, and in the next 10 to 15 years, they're going to start thinking and looking at this kind of thing. So I think you're coming on board at a good time. And my generation is fully in the throes of middle age. So it's good. And we're a good generation. I don't know who you want to identify. I don't know if you're an exennial or if you're whatever. It doesn't matter. But
the generation doesn't matter. But as our conversation shows, I need both, because I need the wisdom of those who've gone before and those that are up and coming, and also for your generation or even older, because it wasn't the conversation up until now, to start having that conversation and make sure we get to hear the experiences and what are the questions that you or those who've gone before you are curious to have answered or hashed out, and see what we come up with. Because like we said, we're living longer. There's all sorts of new things that society has thrown our way. It's growing faster than we can keep up with, and we're losing the basic guidelines of how to relate to one another. I know we want to wrap up, but just one last thing that came up.
No, go ahead. I want
to that came up in a conversation today about the political correctness. It was specifically about society in Germany, but I don't know if this probably applies elsewhere as well. That it's you can't talk anymore. You can't say anything without potentially even potentially, not that anybody in your vicinity is offended, but there's a potential you might offend them, so you can't say that either.
Right.
And we're not able to have the conversation. And if I can't say something that's slightly offensive and horribly wrong, so that you can so I can see your reaction and say, okay, wait, teach me so I know better. If I can't have that conversation, how are we ever going to grow? How will those people know to say, okay, yes, it might be offensive, but I can at least have a moment and tell you how to better navigate this in the future. And the same, like I said, when these new life events happen, like retirement age keeps getting pushed because it's financially not viable to have us living so much longer.
Right.
What does that mean? Because I have one guest who talked about anti-retirement. If it's divorce, like coming up with the rituals, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't have, like I always say, tell me what you need and I'll hop to and do it. And in the back of my mind, like, they're not in a position to know what they need right now. I don't even know what to offer, but I know that they can't tell me what they need. So how do we take care of each other?
Yeah. Yeah, and do it in good faith. I think, so going back to political correctness, there are boundaries, and some people have very narrow boundaries, some people have wider boundaries. There is obviously, potential for harm in mere words, but, as you said, there has to be some space there. There has to be some flexibility. And again, if somebody is saying something that's a little too far, have that discussion rather than just going in a temper tantrum and pouting and all these other things that I, as an older person, I'm seeing that was alien. It's alien, to my generation. I mean, we sort of brought PC into the fore, and the boomers did to an extent, but I think my generation kind of started that, and then it's really become amplified in people under 40. And there's some goodness in this, but it has to be done in good faith. It has to be done not as a narcissistic weapon for self-gratification. And I think a lot of it is performative. I think a lot of it is volatile and toxic, to use their language. It's bullshit. And so we have to find space that we can be a little provocative and a little bit unafraid to say something that, like you said, can be corrected through good discourse and through good faith dialogue. So yeah, I agree with you. But nonetheless, I fully admit that there needs to be boundaries of sensitivity. The old paradigms can't stay. And so I'll invoke women, and what women have dealt with. You guys have been through a lot, and I don't want to see harm. I'm kind of a quasi-feminist, and I just don't want to see further perpetuation of the violence against women, whether it's verbal violence or physical violence. And so yeah, so there has to be this appropriate tension there, so we can't be misogynistic, but teach a man how to speak better, or teach a man how to think better because he just said something misogynistic. Give him that space, and then say, okay, I'm not going to be your nanny and your teacher here, but think about what you just said and think about how that could affect two or three iterations downstream, and somebody could end up getting hurt, and just think about that, but I'm not going to cancel you or anything if that's how you are. I'm not, fine.
So I guess all I'm saying is we need the space to just be human, and we're not going to all get it right. I'm not perfect. I can't guarantee that everything I'm going to say is always going to be 100% conscious and aware and taking care of everybody around me. I'm a human, and I don't know everything, but I need to have the space to express myself and say what I need to say. And if that comes across as potentially offensive and I don't know why, it doesn't work to just say, well, that's it. You should know better. We can't talk to you. How dare you? Shame on you.
Yeah.
There needs to be the place to have the conversation and get curious and say, okay, well, find out why I don't know better. Find out why I said what I said. Because I promise you, if we just talk more, there's so much we can learn and discover how we are actually, at the end of the day, all just human.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're all the same. Really, we are.
Yep.
Same with like the age thing. It doesn't really matter. You'll find 18-year-olds who act like they're 80 and 80-year-olds that act like they're 18. The number doesn't mean anything. So just get curious, and who knows what you'll discover. But always be able to have a conversation. Yeah.
Show up in good faith and show up with solutions in mind. So I always think there's conflict-oriented activism and there's solution-oriented activism. Which camp are you in? And it's not meant to be divisive. It's just what's your agenda? Are you just here for the conflict? Are you here to upset and again get that personal gratification, whether it's a cortisol shot or a dopamine hit or whatever you're farming for? Ask yourself these hard questions and how are you showing up in a conversation? How are you showing up to have an interlocutor share themselves with you?
And I'll add one final thing about the solution oriented. To me, sounds very masculine, and it's not a bad approach. But to be open to the fact that women we are wired differently. We are different. This whole concept of being equal doesn't make sense. We're not men in skirts. We are completely different beings. And the solution sometimes is just talk it out. That's it. That is the solution. You don't need to do or fix anything. The solution is just listen. That's it. That's all you have to do.
Right. So I'll extend it one more move that the outcome, do you want an outcome of conflict or do you want an outcome of again, ambiguous solution is, let me listen to you. Let me hear what you're saying and I'll shut up. because men are really guilty of that. It's like, we want to solve your problem. I get that. Yeah, I totally get it. It's like, that's not mansplaining, but it's just this engineering thing that we do. And it's like, I have the solution and I'm going to dictate it to you now. Women are like, no, I just wanted to tell you something and share something with you, and just shut up. Listening to me is enough. And I'm sorry if I'm not, if I'm appropriating that or I'm not saying it right, but that's what I interpret.
You got it. And because we don't have enough of these conversations and we don't listen enough to those who have fallen flat on their faces in relationships and come to the other side to say, okay, I tried it that way. Let me tell you, when I actually took a moment to catch right at the moment when I was getting heated, to be like, okay, wait, I'm sorry. I forgot to tell you. I don't want an answer. I don't need you to fix this. I'm asking you, the way you're going to fix this for me is to just sit there and listen. All I need.
Yeah.
Not that it works every time, but having just like that little tidbit can make a world of a difference for someone else.
No, I agree. I think this is a beautiful way to end it. But I do want to say that I would like to have you back when the Middlescent podcast is under steam or under sail, and it's out there in the seas and it's gathering up.
When it's not my project anymore and it belongs to the world. Yeah.
Right. And I'll abuse the metaphor. You're harvesting from that sea of wealth of information and so forth. I do want to get you back, and maybe we can extract some wisdom from your guests and share that. But I also want to talk to you more about film and working in film, because I have questions about how can you be subversive in distribution and bypass what you were saying earlier, like have these corporate layer that only sees that they want to make a 10-figure return on their film, or 12 figures or whatever they're going for, and how does a little company go. So I think if we could pin that for another conversation, I'd love to talk to you about that, because that in itself is its own, and in the era of mass communication and the internet and so forth, it's just, to me, is kind of an interesting frontier. So I'd like to cover that with you. And again, we can also bring in some of your conversations. So maybe early 2024, I can bring you back and have that conversation with you, because I think it'd be fun. I enjoy speaking with you, and this was a rich conversation. I think we covered some terrain here. So I like that, and it felt good. It felt natural and flowy. So I appreciate that, and thank you for that. So did you have any other things you want to add before we say goodbye to everyone?
No, just to thank everyone for coming along on this crazy ride with us.
Yeah, those of you that are still with us, because I watch my analytics, and I always say that at the end of every conversation, I about 10%, 10 to 13% stay to the end. So you guys are always the best, amazing, number one, gold star. So thank you guys, thank you audience, YouTube, and again, all relevant links will be down there below. Any updates, we'll post them. So if you're curious, just bookmark her website, and you'll see from that as well. But I'll update down here also. So Ayelet, thank you so much for being my dialogue companion and having this really important conversation as far as I'm concerned, because this is rich terrain in terms of people in flourishing and well-being and these things that I'm interested in. I think this is valuable territory, and you're embarking into that territory. So I wish you Godspeed in that, and look forward to the progress both on your acting front and as well in production of this Middlescent podcast. So again, gratitude to you for that, for being my companion in this conversation. I'll say goodbye to you after we stop record, but to the YouTube audience, thank you guys so very much. Take care, and we'll see you in the next interview.